So hello, I'm Shannon Stokley, Deputy Director for Science Implementation for the Immunization Services Division. And I'm happy to present today the results from the 2021 National Immunization Survey team. And this report was recently published in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report on September 2nd. So during my presentation, I'll provide an overview of the NIS team methods, highlight some of the key findings, and discuss what we've learned so far about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on routine vaccination. The NIS team is a random digit dial telephone survey of parents of adolescents aged 13 to 17 years. With consent from the parent, vaccination histories of the adolescents are obtained from the medical provider, and therefore our estimates are based on medical records and not parental recall. The 2021 survey included 18,000 adolescents who were born between January 2003 and January 2009. This slide shows the trend of vaccination coverage from 2006 through 2021. Tdap vaccination is shown in red, meningococcal vaccination is shown in dark blue. The first dose of HPV is shown in orange, and up to date for the HPV series is shown in green. Nationally, vaccination coverage for Tdap and meningococcal vaccination is high at about 90%. And this is much higher than coverage observed for HPV. And coverage for the first dose of HPV is 77%, and coverage for the HPV series is 62%. Although the coverage for HPV vaccine is lower than for other vaccines, coverage significantly increased in 2021. Shown here is the first dose of HPV vaccination coverage by state. And there's a wide variation in coverage across the country, ranging from 56% in Mississippi to 90% in Rhode Island. And coverage is typically lower in the Southeast. This slide shows state level coverage for the HPV series. And again, coverage ranges from about 33% in Mississippi to 83% in Rhode Island. And a similar pattern emerges with lower coverage of the southern US. Since the HPV vaccine has been licensed and introduced, we have observed an interesting pattern in vaccination coverage by race ethnicity. Consistently over time, vaccination coverage has been higher for Hispanic and Black adolescents compared to white adolescents. It's not clear what may be driving these differences, but the pattern holds whether we are evaluating initiation or completion of the series. We also see differences by vaccination coverage by urbanicity. Vaccination coverage has consistently been lower for adolescents living in rural areas, as seen by the red line, though the difference appears to be narrowing with the most recent years of data. So on the positive side, vaccination coverage has been increasing for rural adolescents at the same rate as urban adolescents. Now I want to switch gears for a moment and talk about the pandemic. The past 2 years have been difficult on so many fronts, and routine vaccination is no different. And we know there were disruptions in healthcare services in 2020, and some of those disruptions continue. And so we wanted to conduct an analysis to see if there was any impact of the pandemic on HPV vaccination. And now you might be thinking, what impact? Our survey data showed that HPV vaccination coverage has been increasing every year, even during the pandemic. But the 2020 NIS team was limited in its ability to evaluate the pandemic, since most of the teams included in the survey had started the HPV vaccination series before the pandemic was ever declared. And it's not until the 2021 NIS team that we are starting to include teams that were receiving some routine vaccines during the pandemic. So as a reminder, routine vaccinations for adolescents are due at ages 11 to 12 years, while the NIS team surveys adolescents aged 13 to 17 years. The 2021 survey is the first year to include adolescents who reached age 12 during the pandemic in 2020. And so this allows us to evaluate the impact of the pandemic on younger birth cohorts. Our analysis consisted of assessing vaccination coverage by age milestone and year of birth. In order to have adequate sample sizes for each birth cohort, we combined data from the 2015 through 2021 NIS team surveys. To assess impact, we compared the vaccination coverage of the birth cohort reaching a milestone age during the pandemic to the vaccination coverage of the birth cohort reaching the milestone age before the pandemic. So in the next series of slides, I'll show tables with vaccination coverage estimates by birth year and milestone age. In each table, the cohort reaching the milestone age during the pandemic is highlighted in yellow, and the cohort reaching the milestone age before the pandemic is highlighted in orange. So in the example shown here, using the milestone age of 12 years, we would be comparing the vaccination coverage estimates of the 2008 birth cohort, which turned age 12 during the pandemic, to the 2007 cohort, which turned 12 before the pandemic, to see if there was any change. So now let's look at the results for the first dose of HPV vaccine. Again, the birth cohort reaching the milestone age during the pandemic is highlighted in yellow, and the birth cohort reaching the milestone age before the pandemic is highlighted in orange. The results of the milestone age 12 years is outlined by the red box. Here you can see that the vaccination coverage estimate for the 2008 birth cohort is similar to the coverage estimate for the 2007 birth cohort. So at this point, we do not see any negative impact on HPV vaccination during the pandemic. Now let's focus on the milestone age of 13 years. Note we have two birth cohorts who reached the milestone age during the pandemic. But first, let's focus on the youngest birth cohort, 2008. Again, we see that the estimate for the 2008 birth cohort is similar to the estimate for the 2006 birth cohort, indicating no impact of the pandemic on HPV vaccination. When we look at the 2007 birth cohort, we see that estimates are slightly higher than the 2006 birth cohort, but the estimates are not statistically different. If you were to look at other milestone ages, you would see that this pattern continues. And so at this time, we conclude that we are not yet seeing any impact of the pandemic on HPV vaccination. However, we see a different pattern for meningococcal vaccination. Looking at the milestone age of 13 years, we see that coverage for the 2008 birth cohort is 5.1 percentage points lower than the 2006 birth cohort. Thus, we are starting to see some impact of the pandemic on meningococcal vaccination. And we also see a negative impact of the pandemic on Tdap vaccination. At age 12, we see that the coverage estimate for the 2008 birth cohort is 4.1 percentage points lower than the estimate for the 2007 birth cohort. So in summary, the 2021 NIS teen results showed that HPV vaccination coverage continues to increase each year, although it is lower than for other routinely recommended vaccines. And we continue to see differences in coverage by race, ethnicity, and geographic location. And while we do not yet see any impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on HPV vaccination, we are starting to see a drop in coverage for younger birth cohorts for Tdap and meningococcal vaccination. It's not clear why the impact was not similar for all vaccines, but we will continue to monitor the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we should be in a better position to do this as more children who were aged 11 to 12 years when the pandemic was declared age into future NIS teen survey samples. So again, I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to the panel discussion. If you have questions about the information included in this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me at the email address included on the slide.